Hi, this is Devi, and in this session, we will have a look at how to create a Kubernetes cluster using GKE and how do you configure it so that you can connect from your local to the GKE cluster. And we'll also see how to create a very simple pod and then how do you create the pod in the Kubernetes cluster. Okay, this session assumes that you already have a project running in your Google Cloud, and we'll straight away jump into creating the cluster. Okay, so you can create a cluster in two ways. One using your gcloud API, or you can use the Google Cloud Console. So we'll have a look at the Google Cloud Console. So click on okay. So you have this Kubernetes cluster, Kubernetes engine option in the compute section, and then you go to create cluster, and then I'll just mention this as test cluster 1, test cluster, and then you can create the cluster type as zonal or regional. For this demo, we'll just mark it as zonal, and I can select the US Central 1A as my zone, and I'll leave everything else to the default, and I'll leave most of the things to the default except this one. The number of book nodes that I want is 2 instead of 3, and then so here I can pick I leave it to 3.75 gig memory, and you can see that the boot disk space is 100 gig. I leave everything else to the default, and I'll move on to the networking. So here you can either specify the default VPC network, or if you have your own VPC network already created, you can choose that. Now you just click create. Now this should take some time in creating the cluster. Okay, the cluster is created. Now you have to connect it from your local system. And we assume that you have already installed a gcloud and configured it to your GCP project. If not, then you have to go to this link to download gcloud SDK and then run the installation for a gcloud SDK. Now, if you have not configured gcloud to point it to your GCP project, you may have to say gcloud init, but I've already done it, so I'll skip this step. Now, the next step that you need to do is configure your kubeconfig so that your kubectl will point it to the GKE cluster. Now, for that, what you need to do is you can say get credentials command like this: gcloud container clusters get credential, this command. Or if you are not sure, then you can go to the GCP project and just you can pick this command from there. So this should create the kubeconfig file. So I did this. Yeah, now you can see that this kubeconfig file is already created here. Now this file will have the credentials that is required to connect to the Kubernetes cluster. Now that we have the cluster created, you can simply issue some basic commands to check the clusters. For example, you can simply say kubectl get nodes. Now the number of nodes that we selected was 2. So you can see that two clusters are being selected, two nodes are being selected. So you can say qk cluster info. You can see that it gives all the information about this cluster. I've set the alias name for k as kubectl, so that's why I issue this command, or you have to issue like this. Now you can actually create a pod. We'll create a very simple pod. Let's call this pod as test pod. I use IntelliJ to create Kubernetes related configurations files because that's easy. There's a plugin called Kubernetes plugin in IntelliJ. You can actually use them to create the deployment configurations in a very simple way. So I'll say testpod.yml. I just have to say kpod, and then it just creates this configuration. Now I'll call this pod as test pod, and then the image that I'm going to pull is nginx, and this is present in the Docker hub. So I'll just say docker.io. There should say nginx. You can see this file here. Now I created a simple pod which actually is based on this nginx image. Now all that I need to do is apply this configuration to the Kubernetes cluster. So I have this file. Now you have to say k-apply-f test-pod.yml. Now you can see that yeah, it is in the process of creating the container. You can see the status as container creating. I can see that the pod is running. So you can check all the other pods that are running in this cluster, but you can see that only one pod is there. You can say namespaces to see what are the other namespaces that are running. So for example, if you want to check the pods that are running in kube system, you can simply say like this, then you will get all the pods that are running in this cluster. Okay, that's all for this session, and see you in the next session. Thank you.